During the 16th century, a revolution began in Christianity. A German monk named Martin Luther became increasingly unhappy with the corruption in the Catholic Church. Luther started a movement among Christians who believed authority should not belong to clergy, but to the lay people in their study of the Bible. Followers of the Reformation were known as Protestants. As the Reformation spread throughout Europe, it gained popularity in Switzerland. Thanks to the efforts of Huldrych Zwingli, Swiss people began to support the ideas of Protestantism. Following Zwingli, a Frenchman named John Calvin began a new form of Protestantism in Switzerland. Calvin believed in predestination, which means each person's eternal fate is already determined before birth. Although he disagreed that the practice of sacraments was necessary for salvation, he supported the practices of baptism and the Eucharist. Calvin believed people should be baptized as infants to form a covenant with God. Additionally, he thought people should practice the Eucharist to form a spiritual connection with Christ. Calvin firmly believed in moralistic behavior and favored strict discipline. He believed that the church and the state should govern separately, but the church should have a very organized and stern method of discipline. Under his influence, the church created a consistory, which was a group of pastors and lay people that controlled church discipline. In addition, the consistory often recommended punishment to secular court, which was often heated. Followers of Calvin's belief system were known as Calvinists. Protestants who were inspired by Calvinism in France were known as Huguenots. As the popularity of Protestantism grew in France, many French Catholics grew impatient with the lack of action against what they considered heresy by the Protestants. Heresy is the denial of a basic doctrine of Christianity. Catholic leaders began to feel threatened by the movements of the Protestants. Political religious groups, known as leagues, organized to confront the Huguenots. The Catholic League was a national group that intended to stamp out the spread of Protestantism in France. The group was led by the Duke of Guise, who also had intentions of taking over the French throne. Under Guise's leadership, the League intended to replace King Henry III, the King of France, who was a Protestant. War broke out between the Catholic League and the Huguenots in 1562 and continued until 1598. Political unrest between the Huguenots and the powerful Guise family led to the death of many Huguenots, marking the beginning of the Wars of Religion. In 1562, the Huguenots were defeated by Guise in the First Battle of the War. Guise was killed in this battle. A treaty was negotiated by Catherine de' Medici that allowed Huguenot nobles to worship freely, but peasants could only worship in one town within each district. During the wars, Catherine de' Medici was the queen mother and held power during the reign of her sons Francois II, Charles IX, and Henry III. The Huguenots were worried Catherine was planning a campaign against them with the Spaniards and attempted to capture King Charles IX. They failed, and though another attempt at peace was made, neither side trusted each other. The Huguenots faced a defeat in 1569, but began to gain ground with some Protestant nobles in France. After this massacre, an edict was issued that granted freedom of worship in France, except in Paris. However, Catholics convinced Henry III to repeal this decision, causing another uprising with the Huguenots. The power of the Huguenots in the Catholic League grew, leaving Henry III with less power. After Henry III was killed, he was succeeded by Henry IV, who was a Protestant. Henry IV fought in the ongoing struggle. He converted to Catholicism in 1593. The Catholic League began to dissolve in 1598 when Henry IV issued the Edict of Nantes. The edict allowed Huguenots to worship publicly and within the homes of nobility. More specifically, the edict was made of 4 basic texts, part of which was based on unsuccessful peace treaties from the wars. It also guaranteed safety from the Inquisition for Huguenots who were traveling outside of France. The edict also established that Catholicism was still to be considered the national religion of France. Therefore, Protestants were still required to pay taxes and tithes to the church and also recognize Catholic holidays. Although the edict did not grant total religious freedom, the partial freedom gained was enough to end the wars. The spread of the Protestant Reformation often led to fighting. The leader of the movement, Martin Luther, held very popular ideas that took away much of the Catholic Church's authority. Luther's ideas were adopted by Huldrych Zwingli. Both idealists influenced John Calvin. As the ideals of Calvinism grew in popularity in France, the country erupted into civil war. Calvinist Huguenots fought against the Catholic League for religious freedom and political control of the country. Power plays among royalty and French nobles became common and led to the massacre of many Protestants. The wars continued until religious toleration and partial freedom for the Huguenots was established by the Edict of Nantes, issued by Henry IV.